Shaukut.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Live. Now then, amidst everything that's going on, apparently Sri Lanka, there's a question whether Sri Lanka needs a new constitution. Who better than that? I've got here a person who's an absolute expert in constitutional matters, and is head of the College of Law and Constitution Making in the University of Edinburgh, and he's right here. He's Sri Lankan and he spends quite a bit of time in Sri Lanka. Let's ask him a whole series of questions. Very good evening to you, Asanga Welikala. Doctor, isn't it? Dr. Asanga, very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us here.
Great pleasure.
The first question obviously is, 21 amendments later, or proposed, the 21st is sort of just being proposed now, it's been passed by the cabinet and hopefully get to parliament. Do we need a new constitution? And also the 21 amendments, what on earth, what good has it done to the people of our country?
Yes, I am very firmly of the view that we require a new constitution. Many of the amendments that we have been doing, and especially after the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, all of the last few parliaments have been doing amendments, just tweaking and tinkering with the need for reform that we have. But
why were they unsuccessful? Is there sort of commonality in all their failures?
I think the point is that there is a failure of analysis. What is our constitutional problem? What is it that we are trying to achieve with a constitution? And there are two big questions to answer. And the way that I answer from the perspective of not only as a Sri Lankan, but also as a comparative constitutional lawyer, doing a lot of work in a number of other countries in making constitutions. And my analysis is based on two factors. One is we need a system of government that addresses our problem of over-centralization, our reliance on strong men who are elected, but once elected are relatively unaccountable to the judiciary and to the
is that Dr. Welikala, is that the part of the problem? What are these elements that are difficult to make these constitutional provisions work?
Yeah. So we need to absolutely the understanding that we have to address this problem of over-centralization, and that involves at the one level the abolition of the executive presidential system.
And could you tell our viewers why it's essential that this executive presidency be abolished?
Because we have a system where the chief executive, once elected, in between elections every 5 years, we have seen how, take the last example, where poor economic decisions, incompetence, corruption was going on. We saw this happening. We saw the train wreck happening in slow motion. But our system does not allow us to hold that person to account, force him or her to correct course. And once he has then delivered this unprecedented economic catastrophe, we found that we couldn't even get rid of him without very high political costs. We don't want to have a system where the chief executive, in order to get rid of them, we must do 3 months of unprecedented protests, and then he has to sneak out of the country in the middle of the night. That is not a well-designed system.
No. Many people from the messages that I get and the conversations we have out there, many people think that the Constitution has no relevance to their daily lives. Are you able to tell our public, the sovereign public of the country, why they should care about constitutional reform?
Because the economic crisis that we have ended up in this year will require a very, very long time to recover from. But we must remember that in addition to good economic policies and reforms that we need to put in place, there is a political and institutional dimension to this, right? Because government is constituted in a particular way, and the Constitution is the chief instrument through which that happens. So if you have a system where power is over-centralized, there is a lack of democratic accountability. We can't force governments to change course even when they have started doing things in a wrong way. So there's an institutional dimension to both the creation of the crisis and the recovery from the economic crisis. And it's not simply a question of economic policy alone.
And is this business of strong man, big man, one man or woman, authority in the form of the president. It's virtually untrammeled powers.
Yes.
Is that good?
No, absolutely not. I can be very, very clear about that. This strongman presidentialism is meant to deliver economic growth, deliver stability, etc. In fact, it has the opposite effect. And Sri Lanka is a great case study, where we have neither achieved great economic development nor achieved political stability in a plural society as a result of presidentialism at all. So we need to change that. We have to understand the fact that having more of a balanced, checked and balanced, a more democratic, more accountable political system, in fact delivers economic growth, development, and of course the recovery that we now need.
So do you think that we need this sort of wider political, structure to be able to fully understand and fully deliver upon the people's needs? Because when you have this one person, he or she may be focused only on their interest. In their interest.
That's right. Exactly. Absolutely right. The way to think about it. We need to abolish the executive presidency and return to a parliamentary executive, which is much more accountable to a legislature. We need to reform our legislature, both in terms of our electoral system. We need to have a second chamber, again promoting this idea of accountability. And we need to devolve greater powers to the provinces, so that the central government doesn't have the sole say in the economic direction of the country, but that we have a system where power is decentralized, but at the same time everybody is encouraged to pull together in the national interest.
Right. Right now, as the protests still continue in our country, the people, I suppose, I detect a certain frustration with the people. They protested heavily and at huge cost, in some cases, to their lives too. They managed to a point to change the system, but there are still protesters, and they are still saying now that this new president is hardly democratic.
Yes.
Is that right, in the sense that we have this president who failed to win his own constituency at the last parliamentary elections, and then due to a quirk in our electoral system, in our laws, gets a bonus seat, or his party does, and then we have this national list, which the constitution envisages a certain course of action to put into place in the immediate aftermath of a general election, but it appears to be silent once Parliament has sat. It takes this party 10 months to, or nearly 10 months, to nominate a failed parliamentary candidate to sit in that parliament where he was rejected, really, under this quirky nationalist business. So how democratic, how constitutionally democratic is that?
Yes, I mean, sometimes things can be constitutionally legal, but which are simply not democratic.
Right.
And the kind of constitutional system we have is a classic way of ensuring this mismatch between what is technically legal but ethically undemocratic. And one of the things that I think is worrying about the newly elected president is the fact that he needs to build goodwill and legitimacy. And I see him instead behaving in a very strong, ham-fisted fashion, particularly with peaceful protesters. And that's worrying.
This president sort of there is a perception that he is the darling of the West. But judging by the number of statements from foreign government representatives, the diplomatic community in Sri Lanka, they're deeply unhappy.
Yes, as any democrat, a Sri Lankan democrat ought to be as well. Western governments will be very concerned with the disproportionate use of force. And trying to send off this message very early on in his presidency for a man who is not directly elected by the people but only by parliament, and a parliament that has a serious legitimacy crisis.
Indeed.
Given that the circumstances in which the people elected this parliament we have already got rid of the elected president.
Yeah.
But this parliament also was part of his thing, to have nearly a 2/3 majority for the SLPP there. Those people have really lost their legitimacy, and the principled course out of this, in a way that respects democratic aspirations of the people, is to have an early general election, but that is exactly what doesn't seem to be happening.
And how should we have a new constitution? Should we get experts like yourselves? I'm not saying that you should be plugging work for you, but what I'm saying is that should we get a panel of experts with a clear mandate and a clear timeline to say, look, we want this and you must give it to us in X period of time?
Yes, I mean, I think given how many times we have tried and failed, right? Even where reforms are notionally successful, like a constitutional amendment going through, we are not doing what we have to be doing. And this was the whole experience of the Yahapalana period as well. So I think what we need now is that there has to be some sort of expert input, of course, because we can learn a lot from other countries, other constitutions, all of that, and to that extent, having comparative constitutional lawyers drafting a constitution would be helpful. But nevertheless, it has to be democratically mandated. So I think the best way to do this would be to have a general election, whether that's early or whether that happens in the usual course of things in 2024-25, and thereafter Parliament adopts it legally through the constitutional replacement mechanism procedure that is there in the existing constitution. And that we commit to having a referendum so that it can also be democratically mandated.
Given the fact that this president is, you know, he's, as you said, it may be constitutionally correct, but it is not necessarily democratic. Given that situation and the call by some opposition members for this president to announce a specific timeline to have elections, is that democratic?
I think so. I think we do need that. There are two things to balance here. One is the obvious that needs to be very effective, efficient action from the government to address the economic crisis, and clearly people are suffering. Criminality is increasing. The economy is dysfunctioning. So there has to be that. Obviously, there has to be a great deal of attention given to that in the coming days, weeks, and months. But yet, at the same time, we need to. I think I would agree that we need to think of a published timeline through which, soon as the immediate crisis, the aspects are sort of dealt with, and some degree of stability and normalization can happen. That we do have. Because we can't carry on with political institutions that are so delegitimized.
I mean, if that was the case, in that case, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa would have waited till the end of his term. If they didn't want to listen to the people, he obviously listened to the people.
And in some senses,
in some way. And then he's gone. But then we're stuck with this business.
That's right.
And what are there any provisions in the Constitution that the people can rely on?
Well, no. In the sense that yes, of course, there's an early dissolution procedure.
Yes, but that's
that requires a resolution by Parliament. But after a while, though, in the last 6 months of this Parliament, the President can dissolve without a parliamentary resolution as well. But does this President want to do that? I don't know. And look at what his political interests, and as he sees them, are at that point of time.
It's absolutely incredible that during this huge economic crisis that the country is going through, what we are treated to are appointments as advisors and so on of the president's men. But I'm yet to see or hear of a economic crisis recovery team or words to that effect.
Yes. Well, I would have thought that it's one of the first things that a new president would do in the circumstances in which his predecessor has been forced out of office. The new president is elected presumably by Parliament to deal with the economic crisis, but we haven't seen much of that. Instead, we have seen the use of force against protesters.
And on that note, let's take a quick peek at this evening's headline news from that wonderful primetime news team. We'll see you on the other side of the break, shall we?
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Weather advisory issued for Ratnapura. Will the former president return? Current president speaks to the Wall Street Journal. Is Sri Lanka in the middle of a power tussle between India and China? Unidentified body washes up on Goldface Beach. Vimal writes to Ranil.
Citizen journalists, know your rights and limits.
සමාජ මාධ්‍ය ජාල හරහා පුරවැසි මාධ්‍යකරණයේ නියැලෙන ඔබ දැනුවත් විය යුතු නීතිමය රාමුව අලලා සංවිධාන කෙරෙන විශේෂ වැඩමුළුව අගෝස්තු 7 වනදා අදම ලියාපදිංචි වන්න. විමසීම් 076 388 2111.
Organized by MIM, Maharaja Institute of Management.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation with Dr. Asanga Welikala, who's an expert on constitutional matters. Dr. Asanga, if you permit me a minute or less, I find this ever so wonderful, refreshing, romantic even, but it is this. The Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996 onwards, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this constitution as the supreme law of the Republic, so as to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundations for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person, and build a united and democratic South Africa, able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. I find that terribly romantic. I also find that absolutely spot on, especially when we consider what South Africa went through and what people like Nelson Mandela went through.
Yep.
And so that's truly reflective. How far are we from having anything similar in this country?
Well, I think inspirational preambular language in constitutions, it's not only this one, but there are many
Yes.
others, and this is one of the best ones, of course, and I agree with you on that. But certainly in the Sri Lankan case, were we to be drafting a new constitution, we can think of various formulations to acknowledge why we are doing what we are doing. And generally speaking, it must be this move away from this abusive system where unaccountable chief executives do what they can. We have a culture of corruption. We have an unresolved situation with regard to power sharing. All of this we can capture in the way that the South Africans did in their constitution, and certainly move away towards a system that is geared to the common good, in a way that respects rights, in a way that provides for good government, in a way that looks after our environment and climate change, all of these things. The common good is one of the most interesting ideas that we have in moving Sri Lanka away from a culture of abusive constitutionalism to a culture that is geared to the common good of all Sri Lankans who live in this island.
During Palani, the previous government, that government initiated a public consultation process to gather public opinion on what the new constitution should include. What are the main recommendations of that process?
Yes, I think there was that process. Then also there was that was feeding into the public opinion into the Constitutional Assembly and the steering committee, as it was then called. And I think there are fairly advanced drafts that were produced at that time for a new constitution. And not all of it is bad, including the abolition of executive presidentialism, the expansion of our chapter on fundamental rights, our Bill of Rights, to include also socio-economic rights, to introduce constitutional review, that is the ability of the Supreme Court to strike down unconstitutional laws, and a better system of devolution, a better electoral system, something like a mixed member proportional system. All of these were elements of those proposals at that time. Sadly, though, what happened was, because of the mismanagement and time management of the drafting process, that government ran out of steam, and then other things like the failure of the relationship between the president and the prime minister happened, leading to catastrophes like Easter Sunday. By which time, who's interested in constitutions?
Some people were interested in the money of the central bank.
Yes.
But anyway, that's another story, but it is the story. And I'd like to remind all our viewers that back in the days when we first started reporting, when News First started reporting on that bond scam, and when we pointed out about the definitive conflict of interest and the departures from due process, many people found it difficult to chew on, because we had the then minister in charge of the central bank who continuously told us that there was nothing wrong, only to listen to the outcome of a presidential commission of inquiry, who then found that there was definitely something amiss, and they've spelt it out in a many-faceted report that is out, and some of it is now before the courts, but I thought I'd just point that out. Dr. Welikala, tell me, in this new constitution, how democratic or how fair is it to have constitutional provisions to protect the minorities in this country?
That is not an option. It's a necessity in this country, because Sri Lanka is a plural society, a diverse society. We've had a history of civil war and conflict, and a new constitution surely must reflect that. So it may be necessary, depending on the nature of the leaders that we have, the nature of the pro-reform coalition that we build in the future, to make a very clear-cut political decision at that point, whether those provisions in our existing constitution that speak about the special place of the majority community's cultural identity, that we may well have to retain them if we are going to win an election, win a referendum. However, it is absolutely a priori and a necessity rather than an optional extra for us to improve our system of devolution. We may not be able to, at this point of time, as a society, be prepared to go towards full federalism, and that may not even be needed, because there are various other systems of autonomy that increases the ability of the provinces to become really serious partners in the governance of the nation as a whole. So those are the things that we must focus on, and that way that we also think of devolution not merely as something that is a response to the Tamil demands from the north and east, but also something that improves the governance of the country as a whole.
What do you say to the people who say, look, we are terribly democratic, the majority says that you can't have devolution because we don't want it, but we're the majority, and so that's democracy. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm not entirely convinced that the majority is as anti-devolution as it has been portrayed. There are many surveys done over various times. When you tell them this is what is happening, this is what we are doing, be straight and open with them about what's going on, what the benefits to them themselves are. For example, I would argue that if you go to a place like Ua, right, or the south or Sabragamu, you can easily talk to people about the logic of devolution, and they get it. Right? So it has been for instrumental reasons, nationalist politicians saying that the majority would not like this and we can't do this and that and all the rest of it. We need to design a process where we can address the fears of the majority and be very honest. And I think if you do that in a proper way, communicate well, explain the rationales for why the change ought to happen, I'm not persuaded that they can't be convinced.
In your observations, obviously you are an expert on constitutional law and so And it's not just here. I don't mean to belittle Sri Lanka, but you have worked in other countries, including this constitution for Iraq. So in your observations, have you detected anyone? You don't have to name them, but if you don't want to. But have you detected any politician in Sri Lanka with a commitment to achieve this devolution, and who has the gumption to take it on at an election and make it a centerpiece of that election?
Yes, I mean, I will take up the freedom that you gave not to name names, but
at Newsline we say it the way it is.
Yep.
If you want to name that person or persons,
Yep.
please, the choice is entirely yours.
But you will recall for us that the SJ, not only the SJB, but the wider coalition of opposition parties in this current parliament, who unfortunately don't have too many numbers, but they clearly understood the need for constitutional reform as one of the elements of the response to the economic crisis. And they presented a full-on bill for the abolition at first instance, right, as a first step that we will do this, and then later we will come back to the other things when the economic situation
So that's the part
stabilized.
that worries me. We'll come back later bit.
Yeah, but sometimes that's the only way to do it, because that's sort of incremental constitutional change often can be much more effective, in fact. So you're right. I mean, we need to, hedge it in with proper timelines, ensure that people who are making decisions can be held accountable to those to both the content of the kind of values that we were just talking about from the South African example, as well as timelines. But all this can be done, and certainly there is hope that, certainly to the extent that all of the parties that were associated with the opposition in the current parliament that presented the 21st Amendment bill in April, that there are people who and people in senior politics, senior positions in electoral politics, who do get the need for reform, and we must ensure that we work and build this largest possible coalition. And one of the silver linings of this crisis may well be that we can build a broad-based popular movement in favor of reform, which makes the politicians unable to resist that. At the end of the day, the next election, if the public mood is very much in favor of democratization and reform, then like 2015 we can build the coalition.
Well, I mean, in the 19th Amendment we had virtually the whole parliament vote for it.
Yes.
Do you think we can achieve that in this parliament?
I really am very skeptical about this parliament, and even if we can achieve it in this parliament, whether this parliament ought to be doing any reform is a major question for me, given how much the circumstances have changed from the time that the parliament was elected and then where we are now.
What are this is the last question. What are the constitutional options now to bring a change of government? The people are still protesting about that. Will general elections help us get out of this political abyss?
Absolutely. The situation is about, I don't know how sustainable it is to continue with political institutions, and particularly a parliament that seems to have lost public confidence and legitimacy to the extent that we have today. So I think the democratically principled response would be to have a general election as fast as we can, and consistent with the need for the need to deal with the economic, the immediate crisis. But an early general election, certainly, and not holding on until 2025 or 24, I think is a good idea.
Dr. Asanga Welikala, thank you very much for being on Newsline Live. Please come back after you've had a chance to chew on the latest constitutional proposal that was passed by the cabinet today.
Absolutely.
And do come back and tell us and tell the world how Sri Lanka is progressing on that.
It'd be a great pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a wonderful pleasure. Thank you. It's now time for the Primetime News from, again, that wonderful Primetime News team. Take care, have a great evening, and, as always, God bless you all.